and welcome to a new video in the Overexplained series. Today we're going to talk about Caro-Kann. So after e4, white is preparing d4, and what black will often do is play either e5. If d4, then if d4, then black can take on d4, or c5 also to take on d4, or d5 the Caro-Kann, immediately challenging this pawn on e4. So in the Caro-Kann, instead, black plays c6 and will probably put his pawns on these squares here, f7, e6, d5, and c6. And c6 is kind of slow, but black is claiming that this pawn structure is so solid that it will be very hard for white to make use of his extra tempo that he gets at the start. And let's say after d5, e takes, c takes, the c file opens. And in the Caro-Kann, black often gets play on the queen side. So if you like queenside play, could definitely be a nice opening for you. Furthermore, I think it's a very good opening for the ambitious player who wants to get exposure to a lot of different structures and to a lot of different ideas, since white can play really a lot of stuff. So d4, I guess, is the main move, but there's also knight f3, which will probably transpose to some other stuff, or knight c3, which will probably go into the two knights attack, or knight c3. Sorry, I think we had knight c3. Bishop c4 is also played sometimes, the hillbilly attack. It's not so good since white is immediately hit with the tempo, but it's played from time to time. Also f4, which I think it's also not so great. And d3 is a move. And also c4 is a move, the accelerated Panov, which will probably transpose into the Panov proper. So here you have these two hanging pawns, and at some point black might decide to take on c4 and give white an isolated queen pawn. So I guess here probably knight f6 and e6 would be better moves, I think, than to take on c4 immediately. Yeah, that just wastes. I guess maybe it's possible, but personally I think that's wastes a bit too much time. So many players will play e5, and the point of playing c6 and d5 is to give this bishop here on c8 the possibility to come out before you close the center with e6. For example, if we go back for a bit, and well, some players will play the French, but after a few moves here, you see that this bishop here on c8 is blocked by his pawns, and black will try to solve the problem of this bishop in another way, but it will take some time. And in the Caro-Kann, black immediately tries to solve this problem of this bishop by keeping this diagonal open. And here also white has a lot of possibilities. You have knight c3, I think it's called the classical variation or something, or the modern variation. So f3 is called the fantasy variation, or here you see the Marossi variation. Bishop d3 is also a move, but I think it's not so good since black gains a tempo on the bishop, and we can gain another tempo here. So don't think that's actually the best. So in the Caro-Kann there are a lot of things white might try. You might try, for example, to take here, and with c4 immediately try to put pressure on d5. In which case, I guess you can play knight c6, maybe e6. I think I suppose knight f6 is the main move, and at some point black might decide to capture on d4 to give white an isolated queen pawn. And well, in this particular variation, it helps to know how to play the IQP position from both sides. Let's say white goes e5, then there are two main moves, bishop to f5, or which has traditionally been the main move, or lately the move c5 has gained in popularity. So with a similar idea, to still keep the diagonal open, but to immediately try to pressure this center. And there's a lot of theory in both of these, but luckily, uh, if you understand the position, if you understand what you're going for, um, you will, I think, often also be able to figure out a lot of stuff over the board. Obviously, studying and experience does help, but I don't think you should learn all those variations by heart, and I think the Caro-Kann is just too big. There's just too many possibilities to really learn it all by heart. Well, you might disagree, but I think here it's better to play based on understanding instead of memorizing everything, since there's just so much that white can throw at you. So I think it's better, instead of learning everything by heart, just learn the themes and tactics that keep popping up. For example, one thing I did notice is that in the Caro-Kann, if you're thinking about c5 and if you're doubting can I play c5 or not, then more often than not c5 is actually playable. So you want to um, actually, this pawn is supporting this pawn and restricting your pieces in the center. So you want to distract it to this square where it's potentially a lot less dangerous. So now this pawn's somewhat weaker, and you can also maybe push this pawn forward. So this break is often quite strong in the Caro-Kann. Let's say there are other things white can try. For example, white can, in some variations, try to with h3, for example, try to take away these squares and make it difficult for your bishop to come out. But in that case, there's often other plans, other pawn breaks you can go for. If, let's say, e5 and bishop f5, one thing white also might try is, once you close this, to try to make use of excuse me, try to make use of the position of this bishop. So let's say h4 here, the Tal variation, and if you're not careful, for example here, this is a huge mistake already, since white can go g4. So after g4, you could delay the inevitable for a while, but after g6 here, your bishop gets trapped, and if white continues in the best way, that's pretty much game over. So that's a good example of white trying to make use of your bishop, which is a bit vulnerable. And one more quiet way to do it is, you see that now the bishop is outside of the pawn chain, and all those pawns are on light squares, but this also means that this bishop is vulnerable to, for example, IDs like this, or to knight jumps. So that's something you always have to keep in mind. Something else to look out for is, let's say you play this, and white goes g4 anyway, and you go bishop h7. Then there is a very thematic move here, e6. What's the point that, well, white wants to take, and if you take back, then these pawns are blocking sorry, these pawns here are blocking your entire king side. So it will be quite difficult for you to develop. So you would have to go e5 and c5 very quickly to even survive here. So here this is already very good for white. So you see that white does actually have some dangerous tries against the Caro-Kann, but the Caro-Kann is not refuted. For example, after bishop f5, h4, you can play the top move h5, right? And then, well, play can just continue like normal, and here you play e6 to prevent white from going e6 himself. Also, one interesting move I think here after h4, h5, bishop d3 is to go queen to d7, with the point that after knight f3 you could take, or I think you could even go bishop g4, making use of the fact that this pawn here isn't available anymore to take this knight. So like I said, there's a lot of things white can play, and that's why I think it's a good opening for the ambitious player who wants to get exposure to a lot of different things. And it's also quite solid and good to play for a win, since you will often get symmetrical positions. For example, if you take a look at pawn structure, that's very asymmetrical. And for example, let's say you play something like e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6. So here everything is super symmetrical, which makes it really hard to actually play for the win. And with the Caro-Kann, you're immediately creating an unbalanced asymmetrical situation where you can hopefully use your better skill to outwit your opponents. So after e5, let's say again bishop f5, e6. Yeah, what black wants to do is often to play on the queen side, for example with c5, if and often the c file will get opened, or maybe there's some typical minority attack on the queen side. And I guess one of the best ways to take a look at this is to actually take a look at one of the classical game, or one of my own games. So c6, d4, let's switch this off for a while. d5, here black went knight c3, I took, went knight f6, queen e2. What's the point that, well, you have to be careful. You don't want, for example, you don't want to play knight e7, and you can try to figure out why. So take a minute to think about it. So here, in fact, knight e7 loses on the spot thanks to knight d6. and because of the pin, this is checkmate. So, well, it's not really a trick, but if you're unprepared, then maybe you can get caught by this little trap. So just knight takes e4, and after queen d5, there's a lot of things you can do. I played queen d5 in the game, and white took, and like I said, now the c file gets open. Bishop b5, bishop d7, knight takes e7, d4. I played e6, bishop f4, bishop e7, castles, castles. Knight e5, which I think wasn't the best move. So yeah, this bishop might look good here, but there's just two rooks and a bishop here. So it's not very realistic that white will get a big attack here. In the worst case, let's always maybe f6 or g6 and drop this bishop back to here. So here instead I attacked the c pawn, and after rook c1 went rook c4. So white protects the pawn, and here is the typical idea of the minority attack. You just push your pawns forward, and yeah, this is just one move, and you pressure this weak spot on c3. If white retakes, then there's a weak backward pawn on c3 that black can pressure. So rook c8, bishop g3, b5, f4, and here I think was too well, not scared, but I didn't want to allow any complications. But here I should have just taken the opportunity to strike, and instead of g6 immediately play b4. So let's say f5, then here I have bishop f6. This isn't possible since, well, white will lose one rook, and if white tries rook d1 like he did in the game, this rook here is still pinned, so that's no good. And if bishop takes, well, except for dropping back, I suppose I can also just take it, and have a fantastic 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against 4 endgame. So yeah, so that's, I think, a good example of the queenside attack. Instead, I went with g6 and b4 here, rook to d3, and here I made the mistake of trading off everything. Bishop b4 was actually still a way to try to gain an advantage, but anyway that would take us too far. So I think that's a good example of the queenside attack here. So I'm going to show you another game in just a moment, but one thing I also wanted to mention is that it's always, let's see, c6, d4, d5, e5. Let's play some more or less normal moves. So the problem for white is often the development of these kingside pieces. Because white has taken some space, for example, the normal bishop d6 obviously isn't possible. Also the bishop can't come here, and if it goes here, yeah, then it will just be kicked around. It is technically possible, but you will lose some time, and these squares aren't often aren't the greatest spots for this bishop. So what often happens is, let's say queen to d3. So what often happens is that you either first start with c5, and here if queen b5, then just queen d7 and everything is covered. And if c3, then with knight d7, no, there is no check on b5. Let's say castles. So what often happens is that you first develop this knight, and then you could, I'm not sure if you can also put it here, but this is, oh yeah, this is probably better since now we're also attacking this bishop here. And let's say, for example, rook to b1, and finally we can develop this bishop here, right? So it's often in the way, and you'll have to find a way to develop it. Uh, one one way you could also go is, let's say, I'm not sure if this is the best move order, but let's say something like this. So this is the maneuver I wanted to show. It's not the best in this particular variation, but I just want to show you the idea of bringing the knight here, bringing this knight here, and then in the end putting this knight on c6, right? And what's interesting is that now suddenly there's a lot of pressure on e5, and also the pawn on c5 is attacked twice. So here in this variation it's better to just play c5 immediately, but I just wanted to show you that this is in some variations this could be a nice way, a nice way to untangle. Put a knight on d7, put a knight on e7, finally put this knight on c6, and you have two pretty well placed knights. I wanted to show you a game where there's actually some action in the center instead of the queen side. So knight c3, d5, knight f3. So the main move is bishop g4, but lately this move with knight f6 has become more popular. Knight g3, g6. I'm just going over the next few moves a bit quicker. They aren't all the best moves. So queen takes c3 is a mistake actually, and maybe try to figure out why. So here you probably saw that black can play bishop takes f3, and well, if the queen takes, then white loses. If the queen takes, then white loses the pawn on d4. So white took with the pawn, but now his king side is compromised, and this will be quite annoying to play with this damaged structure for the rest of the game. I'm going to quickly go over the moves until the relevant moment. Uh, yeah, those weren't all, all of these moves weren't always the best, but so here there are some ideas. For example, knight a5, knight c4 is an idea, going e5 is an idea, and as you can see, there are some frogging tricks here and some tactics lying in wait. So knight a5, b3, rook c8. So here we have again the play on the queen side. Um, b5, and after b4, rook e8, I'm preparing the move e5. And here, rook d1 was a mistake since, well, the problem is that uh, white can't comfortably take on d5. Let's say queen takes d5, then after queen takes and rook takes, there's knight takes f3, and suddenly the knight is dropping. And if bishop takes, knight takes, d takes, and rook takes, like I think that happened in the game. So, well, let's see. Oh no, in the game, white took quit the pawn, and after this, the position gets opened, and suddenly the black pieces become super active, right? The bishop gets this diagonal. All the files for the rooks get opened. The rook can come to h5 possibly. So rook takes, knight f3. The rest of the game is kind of irrelevant. So knight g3 wasn't the best, since now white loses another pawn, and here I should have taken with the rook, but I took with the bishop. And after a few more moves, I managed to win some more pawns and use these pawns to threaten promotion on the queen side. When the rooks got traded, I won a knight, and well, then the game was just over. So hopefully this was a good introduction for you to the Caro-Kann. I discussed some typical ideas with you. I showed you a few example games. Hopefully it was useful. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment, and I will see you maybe in one of the next ones.